Welcome back to the Tech Startup Network podcast. Joining me today is Zhou, the co-founder and CTO of Monk. Prior to Monk, Joe was an engineer at Snap as a top 30 contributor to the codebase, Google, and QuickBooks. Joe graduated from the University of Pennsylvania, where he received his Bachelor of Science in Computer Science and Master's of Science in Engineering. Joe, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for being here. I'm excited to have you share more about what you're doing at Monk and what you're building. So feel free to dive in and tell us all about it.
Yeah, of course. Quick background. I actually started my career in robotics. So only tinkered with nuts and bolts in the early stage. Slowly got more interested on the software side of things, and then while I was at Google, into it primarily focused on infrastructure, and then ended up focusing as Snap, building on the growth platform for all of the interactions in the app and for hundreds of millions of users and building for like 40 to 50 internal teams. And the motivation for doing all of that is to get closer to the users, to build for users for the specific problems that they want to solve. So here at Monk, we're doing exactly that. Monk is an AI agent that gets your business paid. And we make sure that the users have the best experience, almost as if there's a professional MBA looking after their cash flow.
Mhm. Yeah. And I'm curious to hear, so you focus on accounts receivable specifically. And so I'm curious, what made you want to hone in on that?
Yeah, yeah. I think, the founding story of Monk is quite simple. My co-founder George and I focused on problems within fintech, probably
Mhm.
because there's a lot of derivative benefits to the rest of the world's economy, as well as the literal GDP and how it empowers businesses. And in doing that, we had chatted with something like 300 CFOs and heads of finance and controller over 1 to 2 months. And what we found out is that accounts receivable is often this grudge work that ends up being delegated down, not done in the super optimized way, but on its bottom line has huge implications on a company's ability to deploy cash and ability to walk into the boardroom and say, "Hey, we have our cash under control. We have our expenses under control, but cash is also coming in reliably." And we repetitively got all of these signals, which is what led us to believe that this is the best um, entry in today's age to automate with LLMs, and basically provide a superior solution.
hmm And you're right. I mean, a company can have all of their expenses handled, but if they're not getting paid, then they don't have the money to take care of those expenses. So, cash flow is really the crux of the business. So, I think it's really great that you and your co-founder George have spent so much time chatting with the leaders who are operating within this space every single day to really understand what it is that they need and what those pain points are.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's often overlooked. But let's say your business on average gets paid in, let's say, like 60 days, 65 days. If you can taper that down by 20%, depending on your volume, whether you're doing like an eight-figure, nine-figure, or billion-dollar business, that can literally mean another project, can mean a new vertical, it can mean additional R&D resources, and all of that. And today. Uh, we are able to automate over 80% of that cash for our customers and provide almost a 40% reduction in what I just said, like the days to get paid, which I think ultimately results in happier customers and better businesses.
Oh, 100%. And I'd love to hear, once you and Joe got this idea, you as the engineer, what was your process like of actually building out this process and bringing your vision to reality?
Yeah, yeah. It's a good question. And I think ultimately it boils down to two versions, two steps. I would say the first one is effectively how do you figure out what is the right problem to solve? And then number two is how do you then improve that as quickly as possible? So the first one, it's quite easy. Not everyone focuses on it as much as like I do. Like I personally am a product and user experience focused engineer. So I
Mhm.
start every single problem from that perspective and work my way backwards from first principles. And what that really means in like layman's term is I just talk to the customers a lot.
Mhm.
And the early days, I was the person who literally looked through every single interaction to decide what are the consistent themes that show up that formed kind of like our initial product, which is the intelligent collections agent. Um,
Mhm.
and once you've built it, then you have to focus on how to actually improve it because there's
Mhm.
going to be new use cases, both as you serve the same customer and the customer grows, or as you take on other customers with different use cases. Um, as an example, like getting paid is actually quite complicated and can last multiple weeks and months, depending on the business you're in. Sometimes you'll have delivery damages, you will have disputes on what you're focusing on, well, like on your product or dissatisfactory complaints towards your service, or worst case, like your customers will literally go out of business, or you have to figure out how to collect the cash with lawyers and legal and so on and so forth. So on those, the most important thing, what we found is iterate as very quickly as possible and use both engineering rigor in terms of focusing on like how do you get the best signal and data on what to focus on with the biggest gain in kind of like user benefits.
Mhm.
And a second one is constantly talk to your customers and constantly provide like the best customer service you can provide so that they're willing to share more about what they're thinking and what they've experienced both before and while they're using your product.
Yeah, and I mean, you nailed it. Just being able to talk to that end user and understand if the product where it stands today is actually what they're looking for, and solving all of those needs is crucial. So that way you can make sure that you're adjusting the platform and the product as needed if there's any gaps. The one thing I'm wondering too is I feel like in tech, there's always that mindset of move fast to break things. And so I wonder if that's, I guess, a mindset that you might subscribe to in some way, in addition to still keeping those users at the forefront of just having that idea of like moving quickly before your competitor does to get things out the door, but still making sure that you're optimizing and serving the user the way that you need to.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. The short answer is yes, we absolutely try to move at breaking pace. But there is a nuance to that. And I
Hmm.
think the nuance is the exact business and domain that we're in. Um, Unfortunately, we're in a domain where we are responsible for a business's revenue.
Hmm.
And any sorts of mistakes is both, well, for lack of better words, you literally do not get paid.
Yeah.
And worse is you aggravate and like, piss off a customer.
Hmm.
Um, and that's a huge damage to a company's brand. Um,
Yeah.
so, with that said, it's like it means two things. I think it means that you have to focus on velocity because you have to continue to learn and push the boundaries of what you can do for a customer. So we absolutely do that. But at the same time, it means that as you're shipping, both the engineers on our team as well as our general philosophy is always like you have to own the results of your work and the outcome
Hmm.
of your work so that you can deliver the best experience that has basically no mistakes.
Yeah.
Because unfortunately, I think, being 1% wrong in terms of money and financials and revenue is unacceptable.
Yeah, I think you worded it perfectly where it's like, yes, depending on industry, you might be able to have more leeway, but in your case, as you mentioned, literally helping people get paid, so it's not something that you can really risk or put at any type of, I guess, challenge that might be coming through with that. So I like what you shared of just having that right balance between the two.
Mhm.
And so, as you and your team are building in an AI world, I mean, this is something that everyone talks about in multiple conversations every single day. Like, what's something that you've learned throughout that time, or how has that impacted the work that you do?
Yeah, I think the leveraging AI, there's like different layers of it.
Hmm.
So um, engineers are often prone to like break a problem down and into different layers. And you can kind of think of this as how you want to optimize and what do you optimize on. Um, as a as an easier way to kind of like break it down, it's like the high level of like building the best piece of software, there is the literal working piece, which is coding, which nowadays is like more or less automated. There is testing and making sure that it really functions. There is reliability to make sure that your services run at all times. There's like building a system that you can then build um, as if they're like Lego pieces on top of whatever you can. And there's user experience, infrastructure, so on and so forth. Um, and when you think about like leveraging the AI and where AI comes in, I think the the great thing that we like to think is just like, what is the most amount of value that I can add as an engineer given the total amount of time that I have?
Hmm.
Um, and what that typically comes out to be is a general answer of like build the best system. But what does that actually mean? So then you so then you have to break that down. And I think the the beauty of this, which I think engineers will not be fully replaced in the near future still, despite the advent of LLMs, is that it's somewhat situational dependent. Like
Hmm.
there are times where making sure the system does exactly what you want it to do is the most important. But there are other times where, let's say, you want to actually focus on like, oh, like it's okay if it makes a mistake because we'll catch it through the user experience, depending on how the software is supposed to be used. And providing the end-to-end flow of this in an automated way as much as possible is actually more optimal, for example, than getting only one piece correct.
Hmm.
So I think there's a lot of nuances in there, and our jobs as engineers and architects is really to figure out which piece that you don't need to spend time on, which oftentimes the easiest thing to think through is like the act of coding and the act of testing and the act of, let's say, like doing every single work around it that doesn't add value ultimately to the user and get them pay faster.
100%. It's like, as you mentioned, you only have so much time. So it's like if you're spending hours to things that are tedious or not your highest value work, it's like then you're taking away from the tasks that really do require your expertise and that human involvement in the process.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I think everyone only has 24 hours in the day, and how you spend it and how you allocate it is like it makes a world's difference between like the best engineering team, the leanest engineering team, and one that like has the pretense of work.
Absolutely. And because of AI, there, of course, has been a huge uptick in non-technical founders because AI gives non-technical folks the ability to be technical with all of its resources. But of course, you are a technical founder. And so I'd love to hear how being that technical founder has really positioned you well as you've built Monk.
Yeah, I think it definitely helps a lot. And I
Mhm.
think there's no better time to be building in a startup as today.
Mhm.
Um, because as a technical person, you break it down and you think like, what is the singular smallest thing I can do to yield the best amount of benefits? And it comes
Mhm.
in two ways. I think one is in terms of the customer, and then the second is in terms of company building and team building. So I think the first one being on the technical side, well, it's very obvious you can build the product. But I think the secondary effect is like you can think through really how does the same technology that powers ChatGPT, how does it allow you to allow people to collect more efficiently, but also like make really accurate output. So one of the
Mhm.
modules that Monk focuses on is cash application, and it requires breaking down all the edge cases and payments on when a company receives a bunch of invoices, how do you get them paid? And you have virtually no control over how the buyer is going to pay. And the data is often super, super messy. And it's a very challenging problem in like engineering world is like a non-deterministic problem because it's actually quite hard to know exactly what the right answer is. Um, and it being a technical like person here, it's almost like a kid in the candy store because you get to experiment on different methodologies, and the faster you can experiment, measure, and improve, the quicker your product gets better. So
Yeah.
that's the first one, and I think the second one, um, in 2026, I would say. being technical really helps you think about like how do you make the rest of your team efficient.
Mhm.
And what I mean by that is every single person on our company today writes in a terminal. And you could not have done this 2 years ago. You could not have done this nearly a year ago. Um, and I think it's just great because they are builders themselves. Our ops people, our GTM people are all directly in Cloud Code or Codex. They are directly talking to our code base to both understand the product, to come up with suggestions for the product itself for both engineers and our users. And they're able to just deliver a much better experience to like both pushing us as engineers to ship better product, as well as delighting the customers on just like how exactly we do onboarding, how exactly do we do um, like product improvement suggestions and making sure that we're able to build exactly for their business process.
I love that. It, as you mentioned, it really gives the opportunity for everyone on your team to have that insight and experience with technical work, which wasn't really a possibility previously. And it helps them to sell the product better if they understand the more technical side of it, and being really in the weeds and the day-to-day of it themselves. I think that's huge and really helps to give them a full understanding of everything that you're offering.
Yeah, I think it's one of the best ways now to build a company that's both lean and also relatively
Hmm.
like very flat. Like we do not need to have a as many of check-in meetings or alignment meetings because everyone understands what's actually happening.
Hmm.
And in fact, that probably actually slows it down, which slows down how quickly you can deliver value for customers that are looking for the next level of experience or as they're growing themselves.
Totally. And as of like just yesterday, as of the time of this recording, OpenAPI announced their upcoming IPO. And so I'm curious what your thoughts are on that and if you see that impacting the work that you do as an engineer, in the coming weeks and months.
Yeah, I think the short answer is no. We don't focus on that as much because ultimately I think as builders and um, as a small team, what we're really focusing on is just like how much value we can add to the customer.
Hmm.
And there's a lot of uniqueness to our product that makes it very, very difficult for um, for it to be automated any other way.
Hmm.
And for example, you can certainly do an okay job at some of these, but if you are a business that's working on like large enterprises, uses these like legacy enterprise tools that all of your team is on, it's incredibly hard to get the system correct. So
Hmm.
that's what we primarily focus on, to be honest. It's like, how do we earn users' trust? And deliver the value to make sure that, what used to take a week can take 3 hours in Monk. Um, and compressing that timeline and doing it for the customers who are sending out thousands of invoices every single day and looking at tens of millions of dollars to be collected every single year or every single month is realistically the only thing that we like ruthlessly like think through.
Yeah, absolutely. And I always love to hear a good pivot story. So I'm curious if Monk's product, since launching, if you've ever had to have that pivot moment, just from, as you mentioned, like speaking so closely with the customers and users every single day, if that resulted in you having to change directions at one point.
Yeah, yeah. I would say the core product has always stayed consistent, which is
Hmm.
um, this intelligent collections agent that acts as a person to help you solve the gnarliest of the problems. Um, what we have shifted over time is how much we focus on it.
Hmm.
As an example, like there's a way to go deep and there's a way to go a little bit broader. What when Monk started, we wanted to focus on even more of the surface area. For example, once you have collections, can you then focus on making sure other parts of the communication is correct with customers. Can you actually handle other forms of communications beyond just billing? And ultimately, like we decided that is that doesn't derive the same amount of benefit, which is the core problem that we're trying to solve.
Mhm.
And it's cash flow. So if anything, what we've done over time is focus the team narrowly on this one unique problem, and it's a very simple decision to ship something, which is like, okay, does this feature either or product either help the customers receive cash flows faster or not?
Mhm.
If it does, build it, iterate it on it, and go deeper into it. Find out what other types of problems are adjacent to this. Otherwise, we need to really think about if this is going to add value to the users. And it can come in many forms, right? Like today we have an agent that's able to communicate with the customer, but we're also focusing on, for example, outside of that, how can you enable the rest of the team to use this agent more effectively? And
Mhm.
that comes in through the lens of like, okay, I need to understand on a very high level, what does my cash look like? What does risk look like? What does it change over time? If I do absolutely nothing, what's going to degrade or maintain? And then they themselves can be the AI operators to effectively say, okay, I'm going to prioritize this and expect cash and revenue to increase as a result.
Yeah, that's huge. It's like really being able to understand, is this version of what I'm building actually solving the problem that we're trying to solve? And if not, then it's like don't waste your time and resources on it because it's not going to be productive or have intention behind what you'd like to achieve.
Yeah.
Yeah. And following your recent fundraising, I'm sure that there's a lot of growth that's happening within the product, within the team, the company. Would love to hear the plans that you have for 2026 with anything that you are able to share at this time.
Yeah. Uh, I think generally we focus on how we can optimize cash flow more. Similar to what I shared earlier, I think this is the obsession of the team.
Mhm.
We're a lean team that focuses at the bullseye, which is adding that value. And some of the things I alluded to are like how can you help teams around you to effectively understand your cash and optimize your cash even more? So some of the aspects we may look into growing productizing is, for example, like your actual payment risks, understanding what types of forecasts or analytics is available. And additionally, how do you build for an AI age for companies that are at various stages of adoption?
Mhm.
Like the most cutting edge teams, AI is embedded through the entire company. Whereas in other types of businesses, because of the nature or how physical or tangible with the real world they will have a slightly different use case. So thinking through that is also actively on our mind of just like as this technology continues to mature, how can we build the best use cases for them that ultimately drive a business cash? No matter which team you're on, if you're on billing, collections, accounting, FP&A, so on and so forth.
hmm Yeah, and I think that part is really interesting, is just thinking about empowering teams. So not just focusing on one individual or one team, but thinking about all the other teams that might have their hands within this process and making sure that everyone's benefiting from it.
Exactly.
Yeah. And so one piece of it, one question I'd like to ask you as well is, as you've gone throughout your journey of being a founder, and being a technical founder at that, what have you learned throughout this time that you think could really benefit other technical founders to hear? For someone who's early on in their journey, what's one thing you've learned that you think is really valuable piece of advice to pass on?
Yeah, I think if I were to reflect back, the number one thing that makes a difference is always going to be uh, velocity and how quick your feedback loop is.
hmm
And I share this with a bias because that's our company values is one of them is literally speed. The other one is ownership. And I think if anything, speed and iteration for particularly a technical founder, or a founder in general is the most important thing because whatever you land on in the beginning, you will quickly see different variants of it as you grow the company, as you expand, to see different stages of customers that you're serving. or users if you're doing consumer, and how quickly you can then test your hypothesis is incredibly important. Um, so I'll say the number one is speed. And if I had to give another one, I would say like the ability to take risks and form hypotheses is also incredibly important. And this kind of goes back to uh, how the world has shifted in terms of building products is that, you can actually build things quite quickly now. So what you decide on doing and uh, what you decide. So, for example, should we even do this in the first place? And if so, to what extent? I think becomes a judgment call and a decision quality that is now more important than ever. So, yeah, I'll say it's those two pieces of advice.
Love it. And one of my favorite questions to ask is to have our guests give a shout out to someone in tech that they're really feeling inspired by right now. So it could be a fellow founder, VC, community builder, consultant. Would love to hear who you're really admiring lately.
Yeah. Um, I would say currently uh, the mind comes up is always going to be Dario from Anthropic. I think he has executed the business beautifully well. And it's a very respectable way of approaching company building and technical excellence. In some ways, the company is effectively structured into a flat approach where every single person is effectively a generalist outside of the research team. And I think that's the best way to build. And I often draw a lot of ideas from here is that why can you why can't a single person now do more than what they owned before?
Mhm.
And how do you empower someone to be able to do it? Which I think comes back to the person ultimately, which is like lateral thinking. It's the way that you're able to take high ownership and agency and to really like be able to own your product end to end from the beginning to you improve it. And I think he's done a beautiful job building a team around it.
Yeah, that's a great shout out. Joe, this has been such a good episode, and I've so enjoyed having you on the show to share everything that you and your team are building at Monk. And I'd love to have you share with our listeners where they can find you online in case they'd like to learn more.
Yeah, you can find us at monk.com. We're also Monk on LinkedIn or at usemonk on Twitter.
Amazing. And I'll link to those places in the show notes for our listeners to easily find you from there. Thank you so much again for coming on today's episode.
Thank you for having me. Have a good one.